For decades, there has been one number that Dubai loved to repeat more than almost any other. Tens of millions of passengers a year flowing through Dubai International, making it one of the busiest international airports on Earth. Every government press release, every tourism campaign, every glossy investor brochure pointed back to that number like it was proof of something permanent. Proof that the world needed Dubai. Proof that no matter what happened anywhere else, people would keep flying here, keep spending here, keep believing in here. Music, and for a long time that proof held up. The airport wasn't just an airport, it was the front door to an entire economic philosophy. The idea that if you build the biggest, the shiniest, the most convenient hub on the planet, capital will simply flow toward you, like water finding the lowest point. Connect everything to Dubai, and Dubai becomes unavoidable. But here's the thing about being the center of everything. When something goes wrong at the center, it doesn't stay contained. It radiates outward. And over the last several months, what should have been routine turbulence, a few delayed flights, a few rerouted carriers, turned into something that frequent travelers say they have never seen before. Entire blocks of scheduled flights vanishing from the departure boards within days of each other. Long-haul carriers quietly trimming their Dubai rotations, then trimming them again. Travel insurers adjusting their risk models for the region in real time, which in plain English means the cost of flying in and out of Dubai has not just gone up, it has become genuinely unpredictable. Music, walk through the terminals now and the contrast is almost surreal. The architecture is still breathtaking. The duty-free shops are still stocked with watches that cost more than most people's cars. The lounges still have their chandeliers and their champagne fridges. But the energy, the actual human energy that used to fill those spaces, has shifted. Staff describe shifts where entire gate areas sit half-lit because there simply aren't enough departures to justify running them at full capacity. Ground crews who used to turn planes around in under an hour now find themselves with stretches of nothing to do, because the plane that was supposed to be there isn't coming. And then there's the parking. If you want a single image that captures what's happening better than any spreadsheet, it's the long-term parking structures, rows and rows of vehicles that haven't moved in weeks, not cheap rentals, not airport shuttles. We're talking about the kind of cars that usually get valet treatment the second they roll up to the curb, left, covered in a fine layer of desert dust, some with parking tickets stacking up on the windshield, nobody coming back to clear them. Music, why would someone leave a car like that behind? The honest answer is that for a certain category of person living in Dubai, the calculation has changed completely. When you're not sure whether you'll be allowed back in, when your visa status is tied to a company that might not exist in 3 months, when the cost of insuring anything in this city has tripled overnight, a car in a parking garage stops being an asset. It becomes a liability you'd rather just walk away from. Now let's talk about the malls, because if the airport is the front door to Dubai, the malls have always been the living room. This is where the city actually performs its identity for visitors. Not in government buildings, not in financial districts, in air-conditioned retail palaces the size of small towns, with indoor ski slopes, aquariums, and ice rinks built into the architecture like they're just normal things a shopping center has. Music, for years, the formula worked because the formula had a very specific input, a constant, reliable stream of high-spending tourists and residents who treated these malls less like shopping centers and more like a lifestyle. People didn't just go to buy something, they went to be seen, to spend an afternoon, to feel like they were part of something exclusive and a little bit unreal. So what happens when that stream of people slows down, not stops completely, slows down? You'd think a mall could just ride it out for a season, cut a few promotions, run a sale, wait for the next wave of tourists. But that's not what's happening here. What's happening is something closer to a chain reaction. Music, start with the international brands. These aren't small local shops paying modest rent. These are global retail names that signed long-term leases at premium rates because the math made sense when footfall was at its peak, tens of millions of visitors a year walking past their storefronts. The moment that footfall drops by a third, by half, the math doesn't just get worse, it breaks entirely. A flagship store in a city's most famous mall isn't cheap to operate even when it's empty. The air conditioning still runs. The staff still need to be paid. The lease doesn't pause itself out of sympathy. So brand by brand, quietly at first and then less quietly, stores have started closing, not temporarily closed for renovation. Closed, Shutters down, signage removed, the space sitting vacant in some of the most prominent retail real estate on the planet. And once one anchor brand leaves a wing of a mall, it changes the experience for everyone around it. Foot traffic that used to flow naturally from one flagship to the next now hits a dead zone. Smaller retailers who depended on that flow start seeing their own numbers drop. It's not one business failing. It's an ecosystem unraveling from the edges inward. Music, and here's the part that should really concern anyone who's been paying attention to global markets. When luxury retail in Dubai starts wobbling, it isn't just a local story. The parent companies behind these brands are some of the largest publicly traded luxury conglomerates in the world. When a region that was supposed to be a growth engine suddenly turns into a drag on quarterly numbers, that shows up. Investors notice, analysts adjust their forecasts, and suddenly a story that started with empty storefronts in one city is being discussed on earnings calls thousands of miles away. Walk through these malls today during what should be peak hours, and the description that keeps coming up from people who have actually been there is museum. Everything is preserved. Everything is polished. The lighting is perfect, the music is playing, the escalators are running. But it feels like walking through a museum exhibit of a city that used to be busy. You can almost reconstruct what it looked like in your head from how perfectly the stage is still set. The only thing missing is the people. Music now, every city has slow seasons. Every tourist destination has dips. What makes this different, what makes analysts use words like structural instead of seasonal, is what's happening to the landmarks. The buildings and attractions that were never supposed to be vulnerable. The ones that were marketed, quite literally, as permanent symbols of a permanent boom. Think about what it means when a city's most iconic hotel, the kind of building that ends up on postcards and screensavers around the world, the kind of building that, just by existing, tells people this place has made it, suddenly goes quiet for an extended period. Officially, the reasons given are always reasonable. Renovations, modernization, long overdue upgrades, and maybe in isolation, that's exactly what it is. Music, but timing matters. And when one iconic property after another starts going dark, fountains that were the centerpiece of an entire downtown district, observation wheels that were engineered specifically to be visible from every angle of the skyline, theme parks that were supposed to be the Gulf's answer to Orlando, all within the same compressed window of months, you stop being able to call it coincidence. You start calling it a pattern. And patterns are exactly what markets and travelers respond to, not headlines, not single incidents. Patterns, because a pattern tells you something about the underlying structure of a place, not just its weather that week. Music, here's the uncomfortable truth about cities that build their entire identity around spectacle. The spectacle has a maintenance cost, and that cost only grows over time. A fountain that shoots water hundreds of feet into the air needs constant upkeep. A wheel that's the tallest of its kind on Earth needs constant inspection. A hotel that's been photographed more than almost any building on the planet needs to keep reinventing itself just to maintain the illusion that it's still cutting edge. For years, the revenue coming in was so enormous that these costs were invisible. They were just absorbed quietly in the background, the way a healthy body absorbs the cost of breathing. But when revenue drops, when occupancy at five-star properties falls from numbers that used to sit comfortably above 80% down into territory that would be considered a crisis in almost any other industry, those maintenance costs don't disappear. They become visible, painfully visible. Suddenly, a renovation that might have happened quietly over a long weekend in a normal year becomes an 18-month closure, because there's simply no rush to reopen a building that wasn't generating the revenue it used to anyway. Music, and for the small businesses that built their entire livelihood around the gravity of these landmarks. The photographers who made a living off tourists wanting that one perfect shot, the boat tour operators, the gift shop owners, the taxi drivers who knew exactly which hotel drop-off times to wait near. When the landmark goes dark, their income doesn't gradually decline. It goes to zero overnight. Now let's get into the part of this story that involves the biggest numbers and honestly the scariest ones, real estate. Music, for the better part of 2 decades, Dubai's growth story and Dubai's real estate story were essentially the same story told twice. Every new skyline render, every announcement of a record-breaking tower, every off-plan project sold to international investors before a single floor had been poured, all of it was built on one core assumption. That demand would keep rising, that more people, more capital, more residents would always be arriving to fill whatever was being built, and then some. That assumption worked beautifully on the way up. Off-plan sales let developers raise enormous amounts of capital against buildings that didn't exist yet, using future buyers' deposits to fund current construction. It's an elegant system as long as the pipeline of future buyers never runs dry. The problem with elegant systems built on continuous inflow is what happens the moment that inflow slows down, even a little. Music, and right now, by multiple independent accounts, it's slowing down by a lot. Listings in some of the most prestigious developments in the city, the kind of addresses that used to sell themselves purely on the strength of their postcode, are sitting on the market for months with no buyers. Sellers who would have had multiple competing offers within days just a couple of years ago are now cutting asking prices repeatedly and still struggling to close a deal. International buyers who were in the pipeline, who had verbally committed, who had wired deposits, some of them are quietly walking away, even at the cost of losing that deposit, because the math of holding an asset in a market that might keep falling no longer makes sense. Here's what makes this particularly dangerous. A huge amount of Dubai's property market isn't held by people living in the units. It's held by investors, many of them overseas, who bought into the story rather than the lifestyle. When those investors start to believe the story has changed, they don't behave like homeowners. They behave like investors, which means the moment confidence cracks, you don't get a slow, orderly cooling off period. You get a rush toward the exits, and rushes toward exits in illiquid markets like real estate tend to produce exactly the kind of sharp, headline-grabbing price drops that then become the next round of bad headlines, which then accelerate the next round of selling. Music, it's a feedback loop. And feedback loops in real estate markets don't politely stop themselves. They tend to run until something, a government intervention, a major external bailout, a dramatic shift in the underlying conditions that caused the panic in the first place, breaks the cycle. Dubai has broken cycles like this before, most notably during the global financial crisis, when a wealthier neighbor stepped in with the kind of support that prevented a full collapse. The question this time is whether that same kind of support is available, whether it's willing, and whether it would even be enough given how much bigger the city's property market has grown since then. Music, now here's where this story stops being about numbers on a spreadsheet and starts being about people. Because behind every empty storefront, every canceled flight, every shuttered landmark, there is a workforce. And that workforce is overwhelmingly made up of people who came to Dubai from somewhere else, specifically because Dubai offered something their home countries couldn't: stable income, reliable work, the ability to send money back to families who depended on it. This is the part of the story that almost never makes it into the glossy tourism campaigns, but it is, in a very real sense, the actual foundation the entire city is built on. Construction workers who built the towers. Cleaning staff who kept the malls spotless. Drivers, delivery workers, hospitality staff, retail employees, millions of people whose entire economic life is structured around one simple premise. As long as Dubai keeps moving, they have work. Music, so what happens when Dubai stops moving, even temporarily? For workers on commission-based pay, and an enormous number of tourism and retail jobs in this city are structured exactly that way, a slowdown doesn't mean a smaller paycheck. It can mean no paycheck at all. Multiple accounts describe service workers near major attractions going entire shifts, entire days without a single customer, not because they're not working hard, because there's simply nobody there to serve. And for many of these workers, their entire legal right to remain in the country is tied directly to their employer. If the company they work for scales back operations, freezes hiring, or shuts down entirely, the worker doesn't just lose income. Their visa status becomes uncertain. Their ability to access the wages they've already earned can become tangled in bureaucracy. And the option that workers in most countries would take for granted, simply finding another job in the meantime, is often legally far more complicated than it sounds. Music, this is the human layer underneath every statistic in this story. When we talk about occupancy rates dropping, or footfall declining, or bookings being canceled, what we're really describing at the most basic level is millions of individual paychecks getting smaller or disappearing entirely. People who came here chasing stability are now facing the exact uncertainty they were trying to escape. And unlike the wealthy investors and tourists who can simply choose a different destination next time, these workers often don't have anywhere else to go. Not easily and not quickly. Music, let's step back for a second because it's worth being honest about what we're actually looking at here. Is Dubai disappearing? No, obviously not. The buildings are still standing. The infrastructure still exists. The fundamentals that made Dubai attractive in the first place, its location, its tax structure, its time zone advantages connecting east and west, none of that has physically changed. But here's the thing about cities that build their entire identity on perception. Perception isn't a side effect of their economic model. It is the economic model. Dubai didn't become one of the wealthiest cities on earth by producing something the world needed in the traditional sense. It doesn't have vast natural resources driving this boom. It doesn't.